Yeah, next speaker, Michael Holsworth is Senior Data Analyst and Database Programmer at the Office of Cyber Infrastructure and Computational Biology, and as part of the NIH. And his presentation is geared towards explaining some of the lessons learned using DFsetup screen design features to optimize data entry quality in DFcollect. So Michael, whenever you want, I think you already have co-host privilege to share your screen.
Thanks, Rebecca. I'm going to share my screen now.
Yeah, go ahead.
Give me a shout when you can see my screen.
We can see your screen. Now, if you can enter in presenter mode, we will see just the slide.
Okay.
Great. There you are.
Can you see that, Rebecca?
Yep. I think we all can see.
Great.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks for the introduction. As Rebecca said, my name's Michael Holdsworth. I'm a senior data analyst and database programmer working for the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Before I start, I just wanted to offer a disclaimer. We are still very new to DFcollect. We only implemented DFcollect in March of this year, and since then we've done 4 DFcollect studies. But in that time of setting up 4 studies, we've learned a lot about optimizing DFcollect screen design. So we hope in this presentation will be useful to those groups who are new to DFcollect or those groups who are interested in implementing DFcollect. On a very positive note, we're very happy with DFcollect, and the DFcollect uptake from our users has been very positive, and we predict that most of our future studies will be DFcollect entry studies. This presentation concentrates on things that can be done in DFsetup to optimize DFcollect screen readability. But it should also be said that there are things that can be done at the level of CRF design, which I'll discuss briefly in my last slide. Sorry, Rebecca, I see that someone's trying to enter the room. Should I just admit them?
I just did, Michael, don't worry. I'll take care of that.
Okay. So the thing that I love most about DFcollect is that you only have to set up the database once, and then you can interface with that database using DFcollect or DFweb or DFexplore. Previously, before DFcollect, if we wanted to use a mobile data collection tool that had online, offline capabilities, we'd have to set up a REDCap database, and then we'd also have to set up an ETL and a DFDiscover database. And what we'd do is we'd collect the data in REDCap. The ETL would transfer the data to DFDiscover, where we would do data management. And as you can imagine, this is a very laborious process. And our NIH PIs love to change protocols, and they love to change CRFs, which means a lot of database changes. So every time we had to change a database, we had to change it in 3 places, in the REDCap database, in the ETL, and in the DFDiscover database. So the thing I love most about DFcollect is now we only set up one database, and if we have to make a change to the database, we only do it in one place. And of course, the setup automatically translates the layout into DFcollect by placing one field below the other. And for most screens, this works very well, especially those screens with limited variables. But if you have a look at this concomitant medication page, you can see that there's almost 50 variables on this setup page. And when this translates into DFcollect, what happens is it places one field below the other, and it works perfectly, but it becomes slightly difficult to navigate and readability is undermined. So the good news is there is something you can do about this. Tip 1, setting up screen breaks in DFsetup. So what we did is we went into setup and we went into the order fields tool, and we started to group different conmed fields under screen breaks. So you can see that the underlying page is a log form, and it's made up of four sections for different conmeds. And what we did is we grouped them under different screen breaks. And then when you go to DFcollect, how that looks, instead of one long list of variables, the different conmeds get grouped onto their own tabs. And it's very easy to navigate from tab to tab by swiping left or right, or by clicking on the tab label. And it just makes it a lot easier to navigate, and it's a lot more readable. So we've found screen breaks very useful. In some cases, especially with mark all that apply type answers, ungrouped variables don't work well in DFcollect. For example, if you can have a look at the adverse event page here, you can see that number 7 shows different treatment options for an adverse event. And unless you're very familiar with adverse event pages, it's quite confusing to look at this page, the way it automatically translates here. So what we did in this case is we went into DFsetup and we took those treatment variables. You can see those treatment variables: medication, procedure, surgery, none, new, prolonged hospitalization, and other, and we grouped them under one heading. Sorry, I'm just trying to move these pictures. There we go. We grouped these various treatment variables under one prompt heading, which is called treatment. And you can see we also labeled the various variables in the code label. So for example, medication has got a code label medication, and procedure surgery has got a code label called procedure surgery. So now when we have a look at this in DFcollect, it looks very neat. You can see that that these various treatment options are grouped neatly under one heading called treatment. And if you click on the question mark, it will remind the user to mark all that applies. And then they can see the different treatment options and they can mark the relevant treatment options. And I think this looks much better than previous. As you know, tables display very well in DFexplore, but they don't display in DFcollect. Consequently, one has to find alternate ways of displaying tabulated fields and information in DFcollect. If you have a look at this table on the left, this alcohol use questionnaire, this is a validated instrument and it looks extremely good in DFexplore. And it's got a lot of tabulated information and fields. It's got questions, a scoring system, and then it's got your scoring field. And this works very well in DFexplore, but it doesn't translate well into a DFcollect environment. So what we did in this case is we took the question. For example, if you have a look at 1.1, how often do you have a drink containing alcohol? And we put that into the prompt field. And then we took the scoring system and we added that to the field level help. And we formatted it to a certain extent. And now when we go into DFcollect, this is how that table looks. You can see 1.1, how often do you have a drink containing alcohol? And if you push on the question mark, it comes up with the scoring system. and you can select the relevant category, and it works very well. Here is another example of a table that looks very good in DFexplore, but doesn't translate easily into DFcollect. This is a vitamins and minerals table. You can see that there are 8 vitamins and minerals, and next to each vitamin and mineral, there are 3 variables. There's a not done checkbox, there's a results field, and then there's a clinically significant, not clinically significant choice field. So what we did with this particular table, sorry, I'm just moving the video again. What we did with this particular table is we created screen breaks. Oh, sorry. We created screen breaks so that the various vitamins and minerals appear on their own tab. Secondly, we also grouped the variables common to the particular vitamin and mineral under one heading or prompt. And thirdly, for non-numeric fields, we added the relevant code labels. And for numeric fields, we completed the field units property. So down here in the left image, 1.1, for example, we took these 3 variables, the not done checkbox, the results field, and the clinically significant, not clinically significant choice, and we grouped them under one tab. And we also grouped these variables together under one prompt heading. And you can see that prompt heading is vitamin A. And then what we did is, for example, with the not done box, we added a code label called ND for not done. And then if you have a look at this image to the right, for the numeric fields, we added a label in the units property, and the label in this case happened to be the units of measure. So the effect in DFcollect, I thought worked very well. You can see that there's different tab headings for every vitamin and mineral. And below each tab heading, there's a nice header with the 3 fields, the not done field, the results field, and you can mark the choice of whether it's clinically significant or not clinically significant. And this seems to work very well. And as I mentioned before, it's very easy to navigate between tabs by swiping left or swiping right. This was also another interesting table that we had to translate into DFcollect. It is a Bristol stool chart, and in the case of this table, we concatenated the 3 columns, the stool type, the description, and the type into the code labels. So if you have a look at this image over here, we took the 3 bits of information, the stool type, the description, and the type, and we put it into the various code labels. But when we had a look at this in DFcollect, you can see that some of the longer code labels are being cut off, which is problematic. So in this case, we added a field level help message, which asks the user to view this question in landscape. Now, I understand that this is not necessarily the best solution, but as we usually do, we were operating at the 11th hour and we had to put a study live. So what we did is we created a field level help message that said, view the screen in landscape by turning the iPad 90 degrees so that the long edge of the iPad is at the top of the screen, ensure that rotation lock is off. And then what happens is when the users come to this question, they have to click on the help message, and then it prompts them to view the message in landscape, and then they can see all of those code labels, and it works very well. And as I said, there's probably an elegant way of doing this, but for us, we just made it work at the 11th hour by doing that. Tip 6, fixed list or drop-down display. As you know, choice fields can either be displayed as a fixed list or a drop-down list. And in a DFexplore environment, choice fields are mostly displayed as a fixed list. And that's because there's a background image, and fixed lists work very well in DFexplore. However, we've discovered in DFcollect, very often it's beneficial to display choice fields as drop-down lists. For example, if you have a look at this end of study page, you can see that question 2 says, did the participant complete the study per protocol? And if no is marked, then they've got to select a reason. And when you look at those reasons in a DFcollect environment, you can see that the reasons dominate the entire screen, which I think is somewhat problematic because you can't see any other aspect of the form. So what we did is we went into DFsetup and we changed this choice field to be a drop-down list. So now when you come to the field, it comes up with a drop-down dialog, and you choose the option which is relevant. And once you've chosen the option that is relevant, then only that option displays, and you can still see the remainder of the form. And this works very well for our end users. And it just makes the form easier to navigate and more readable. For our NIH NIAID DFexplore entry studies, where data is entered in DFexplore, edit checks are mostly fired on field exit. And this works well for our DFexplore entry studies because we train our data entry staff to tab through every single field. So they have to tab through every field, and we're pretty confident that the edit check will fire. However, for DFcollect entry studies, we are now considering the benefits of firing some edit checks on plate exit. For example, the required edit check, which adds the QC notes to the field if the field is blank. What I've observed in DFcollect is that when the users are moving through the DFcollect fields by touching on field after field, if they can see that the next field is blank and they know that there's no answer to it, there's a tendency for them just to skip over that field. And what happens is if the edit check is being fired on field exit, then that edit check doesn't fire. So what we're doing is, in some cases, we put in that edit check onto plate exit to force the query. And lastly, I spoke about this slide when I first started the presentation. There are certain things to consider when designing the CRF for DFcollect. Because we are new to DFcollect entry studies, our monitoring team, who mostly develop our CRFs, still designs the initial CRF with paper and DFexplore in mind. However, we are starting to understand that designing a CRF for paper or DFexplore entry study is different to designing a CRF for a DFcollect entry study. For a paper DFexplore entry study, we generally try to fit as many data points onto the page without undermining readability. And we also know for a paper or DFexplore entry study that we can place variables next to each other, side by side, and top to bottom. And we also know that we can use tables for tabulated information and tabulated data. But for a DFcollect entry study, we are starting to understand that less is more, and that it is better to have more screens with fewer data points per screen. And we also understand that fields can't be positioned next to each other. And we also understand that tables don't translate well into a DFcollect environment. So these are just some of the things that you can consider when designing a CRF for a DFcollect entry study. Of course, this doesn't really work for a hybrid study where some sites are entering data using DFcollect and other sites are entering data using DFexplore. And thank you. That brings me to the end of my presentation. Here are some acknowledgements, and I'm happy to answer some questions if there are questions.
Thank you so much, Michael. Very comprehensive presentations, not extent of challenges. Sorry. Lisa, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. This is really good. And just seeing what you found in the tips is really similar to DF Engage, right? There's what we're used to on paper, and then, okay, we can use that paper in DF Explore, and then wait a second, now we're on a phone, now we're on a tablet. So I really appreciate those tips and those tips. Yeah, the things like grouping that works really well with DF Engage as well. And the edit checks on plate exit, we found that not so much with DFcollect, but with DF Web, where our sites are using tablets. They want to use tablets, they don't want to use laptops, but you can have backgrounds with DF Web, and same thing when you're using your finger, you can't hit enter or tab all the way through. So we've had to move the edit checks. Also, when you're on slower bandwidth, like some of our sites, having the edit checks on field exit slows things down, and it'll start to frustrate them, and you just don't want the sites to get frustrated. So moving them to plate exit has made them a lot happier.
Yeah, thanks. And Lisa, I forgot to mention in my introduction, just to give you positive feedback, we're extremely happy with DFcollect and the uptake from our users. And as you know, we've got over 500 active users, has been very positive. And we predict that most of our future studies will be DFcollect entry studies. So DFcollect is working very well in our environment. Thank you.
Great.
Just have a question, Michael. It was a great presentation, thanks. And DFcollect was designed as a data collection tool, but we'll be expanding DFcollect, or perhaps it's some kind of merger of other things like DFexplore, DFengage, and DFcollect into one kind of more universal package. What would be kind of the next sequence of things? Like, for example, you can add queries, but you can't find queries easily. Is that an issue? Like reports, is that important to see on a tablet? Data listings. What would you think would be the next feature that DFcollect or something like it would need?
Sure, that's quite a question. Generally for our sites, for like reviewing queries or running reports, they do that in DFexplore when they're back at their home base. So most of the sites I'm working with, and I stand to be corrected if Michael D is on the call or Kaval, most of our sites are really just using DFcollect to collect data. And it's great that the edit checks work so well in DFcollect and DF Open Patient Binder. That's a great feature. But I think mostly for a lot of the data cleaning and reports and exporting data, and that it's still being done in DFexplore. And I'm not sure whether they would ever do that in DFcollect. Michael D.
Thank you, Michael. So my suggestion here is that if there could be a consideration for a dashboard type of screen that could lead the clinical site to really understand what is outstanding for their specific site, right? So maybe a display of where they are with data entry, how many pages are currently outstanding or are currently in a query or a rate or an unresolved state. And maybe it would be great if there could be an indication of how many queries for that specific state. I'm kind of thinking of like Medidata Rave, where they have screens like that can just be an introduction of how far they are with the processing for their specific site.
Right. And maybe instead of having the elaborate query mechanism we have, just kind of like, here's the queries you need to look at today, and just drive them to that. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yep, we have more hands raised, so go ahead. Go now, Leap.
I was just going to say, one of the other things, Daryl, to consider is that with the sites collecting this data with the participant in hand, right? So some of the tools that you have to remember is that we want some of that information while they're there with the participant, not when they go back, because then there's an opportunity loss.
Right.
That is more work to, while one, it might not be possible, two, it might be more work. So some of the features or enhancements are things that you can look at before you let the participant get out the door. Thank you.
Thanks to you. Just reading the chat, Eric is commenting, Michael, if you can comment on the usage of online versus, online versus offline.
So this is a great feature for us because a lot of our studies do go out into the field and they work in areas where there isn't good internet connectivity or where the internet connectivity is inconsistent. So what we instruct them to do is download the necessary patient binders before they go out into the field and then go offline, go out into the field, work on that, come back, go online, and then upload the data. So we love that online offline feature. And I believe for us, it's working very well. Is that what you're asking, Eric?
I'm pleased to hear it's working well. I guess I was, and I think you've answered the question if there was a preference for one over the other, but I took away from your message that the technology is dictating that in most cases.
What we found, Eric, is that even when study teams go out into the field and there is limited internet connection, if that internet connection is dropping and picking up, that causes problems with DFcollect, especially if you're trying to download a patient binder or if DFcollect is supposed to be online and then it's constantly losing connection. We found that causes problems. So in that case, we found it's better for them to rather switch to offline mode, work offline until they get back to a place where there's stable internet connection.
Great advice. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks.
Just continuing with this, Nita is asking how to download patient binder in DFcollect. I guess that this not sure if we can show this or if this is a quick answer, Michael.
It's very easy. There's two ways to download a patient binder in DFcollect. You can either go to, you can open up DFcollect and you can go into the relevant study and the relevant site. And you can either go to that patient number and then next to that patient number, correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, there is a download arrow and you can download that specific patient. Or you can go up to the application menu and there's a storage and syncing feature and you can select the patients that you want to download and you can download them in batch. So there are, according to my understanding, there's two ways to download patient binders and it's very easy. We've trained a couple of sites and they find it very intuitive and easy to manage.
Thank you, Michael. Another question. Yes, we have time, I think, for one more question, I think, and then we will go with Amnat that just raised the hand. But the one question before going with you, Amnat, Kanwaldip is also asking if you want to speak. Did you want to speak to sites getting used to DFcollect?
To some extent, and Kaval could probably also answer this. So we did find that we did have to do initial training on DFcollect, but generally, Kaval, correct me if I'm wrong, I found that the sites picked it up very quickly. I don't know if it's because smartphones are so prevalent and tablets are so prevalent that generally people pick it up very quickly, and we found that the transition was quite smooth. Do you agree, Kaval?
Michael, I raised the question so you could make it a point to point out that the sites did find using or shifting to this new technology once training was done. We had our initial road bumps, but ease of use so that they could get out into the field with time crunch and COVID and everything. But they, with the training done, they were able to get out and we were able to get 4 studies started. So it is, there's ease of use there once the training is done. I think that's a good takeaway as well.
I think generally I found it very intuitive. You know, I hardly had to look at the manual. I would just go into DFcollect and I could intuitively know exactly how to navigate from menu to menu and how to download patient binders and how to upload data and go offline and online. So there is some training to be done, but generally I find it very intuitive.
Yeah, I'm not go ahead.
If it is offline, is it possible to get duplicate ID?
It is possible, and this is why the one thing that we have had to manage is we've had to get the study teams to write very careful SOPs on how to manage collecting data in an offline situation. Because obviously if you're offline, you've got to manage who's going to be entering for which ID, and how that whole process of entering data and uploading data is managed. So usually we manage that with an SOP at the site level. But also just to say, DFcollect does handle those conflict resolutions. So if 2 people make changes to the same patient ID when in an offline and then it gets uploaded, DFcollect does identify that as a conflict resolution and it does bring it to your attention, and then you can adjudicate to see which change should be pushed to the server.
Yep, great question, Amnat. Thank you so much.